Good evening. I'm going to call this meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee to order. Today is Tuesday, December 6th. We are here in the council chambers of City Hall. Item number 2 on the agenda is to identify any potential conflicts of interest. Do we have any potential conflicts of interest? Seeing none, I want to bring everybody's attention to the fact that item number 7 is being pulled from the agenda. We will not be discussing or taking action on number 7. Number 3, citizens' comments. Do we have any citizens that wish to address this committee? Any citizens' comment? There are a lot of citizens in the audience. Any citizens' comments? None. We'll move on to number 4, the consent agenda, which include the minutes of the November 15th, 2022 meeting, bills and payroll, the monthly position control report, and the October Treasury report. What is your pleasure? Mrs. Spiros. I have a motion to approve by Mrs. Spiros, second by Mr. Hendler. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on that. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries unanimous. We had nothing removed, so we can skip number 5. Number 6 is the request to recommend council approval of budget resolution number 12-2022, the decontaminating foam wagons, disposing of waste foam, and replacing 4 275-gallon totes of foam. And this is being presented by Pete Fletty, Fire Chief.
Good evening. Thank you. A little history behind this. Back in 2010, when Marshfield Utilities was building their M1 project site out on 34th Street, they added 2 75,000-gallon diesel silos out there. That's how we came to attain the foam wagons, I guess, if you will. Each wagon contains 550 gallons of foam. We needed that amount of foam to protect those 2 diesel silos. That's how we took ownership of them. So that's just a little history behind that. As we know, Class B firefighting foam has a lot of PFAS in it. We were successful in the statewide grant of disposing of our PFAS old Class B foam. However, conversations then turned between Marshfield Utilities and us as to who was going to replace the foam on the foam wagons with new PFAS-free Class B foam. We met with Marshfield Utilities and they agreed to replace that foam on the foam wagons, so it'd be 1,100 gallons of foam, and that passed their Utilities Commission on November 14th of 2022 in an amount not to exceed $53,000. In addition to the purchase of the Class B foam, we do need to decontaminate a foam wagon. They also agreed to pay for that. Approximate cost after estimates was about $50,755, so $53,000 should be enough to cover that. However, the reason this budget resolution came to play is we will take ownership of this new Class B foam as a fire department. Marshfield Utilities has agreed to allow us to use these trailers on other incidents as long as we replace the foam afterwards. So with that, it would be our responsibility as the fire department in the city to initially purchase this foam and decontaminate the trailers, and then they will in turn reimburse us after those invoices have been submitted. So we're fronting the money. They agreed to pay it back. Hence, that's why this budget resolution came into play. So I recommend that budget resolution 12-2022 be approved as presented.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Wagner? All right, we have a motion to approve and send on to council. A second by Mrs. Tompkins. Questions, discussion? Mrs. Tompkins.
I'm wondering who owns these trailers? Are they owned by the city of Marshfield or owned by Marshfield Utilities?
They are now. They were depreciated out through the city. So Marshfield Utilities initially purchased those and the foam, depreciated out through the city, and now we took ownership of them. So
if we need to do maintenance or upkeep or upgrades for these, this will be the city needs to do that on these vehicles?
Correct. That was in the agreement, I believe, back in 2010.
Any other questions or comments? What is the life expectancy of these trailers?
They're still in really good shape. We haven't, knock on wood, we haven't had to use them. So it's very minimal maintenance. Life expectancy, they're in great shape yet. They're 12 years old. It's tough for me to say, but they're going to last a significant amount of time.
So it's
Yeah.
not a heavy recurring expense?
No.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, seeing no other discussion, we'll take a vote on this. So we have a motion to approve and send on to council. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
We're skipping number 7, on to number 8, request to recommend council approval of budget resolution number 14-2022, amending the adopted 2022 budget to increase the 206 fund, which is grants and donations, state grants, other revenue, and grants to individuals accounts, by $250,000. And this is presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director. Mrs. Selensky.
Good evening. So this relates to the grant that Marshfield Utilities manages for lead pipe service replacements. And the revenue and expenditures, this is a reimbursement grant. So once a homeowner goes through the grant process, fixes their pipe service, they pay for it, we submit a request to the DNR and they reimburse us back. So the revenues and expenses for this program always offset and net zero. However, it's been accounted for in the general fund, and in 2020 and 2021, 2022, there's no budget in the general fund for the expense portion of this grant. So what that means is if whatever our budget total is, if everybody spends according to their budget and there's no budget in here, we're over budget by the amount of this grant. Because this program has a dedicated and consistent revenue source, it is allowed to be recorded in a special revenue fund, which is our 200 level funds, such as our taxi grant has its own fund, and our Drug Task Force grant has its own fund. What I'm proposing is to move the revenue and expenses out of the general fund and put them in a special revenue fund entitled grants, so that the net impact is zero, but in the special revenue fund, because revenue will equal expenses, it benefits the general fund because there's no budget, but we have actual expenses. So with that, I recommend approval of resolution number 14-2022, that the committee recommend council approval of this budget resolution.
What's your pleasure? I have a motion by Mrs. Tompkins to approve, a second by Mr. Hendler. Any questions or discussion? Mrs. Tompkins?
So is the benefit of putting this into a different fund is sort of like our cost benefit? You know how the state, they have a certain amount of cost, or is it something to do with what our fund looks like and how we're spending out of the fund?
It matters to the general fund because there's no budget there for actual expenses. I think that happened because their revenue and expenses were always equal, so it was overlooked as a budget item. However, this is in the Public Works Department, and every time I run a report, the Public Works as a department is over budget by the amount of these grants because nothing was ever entered. So it is common to report for grants in special revenue funds because they're really, they can be one-time grants or they can be ongoing where it's consistent flow. And this would actually establish a budget in 2022 in that special revenue fund so that expenditures are actually authorized.
Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote on that. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Number 9, request to recommend council approval of resolution number 2022-49, continuing appropriations from the 2022 budget carried over into 2023, presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director. Ms. Selensky.
So from time to time, we plan certain expenditures and they don't occur in actuality in the year that they're budgeted, but we either have a commitment already out there in the form of a purchase order or a contract, whereby we're still committed to purchase the good or service. This is something that we do on an annual basis. What this will do is it will set aside money that is unassigned in the general fund to a committed status, which requires a vote of council, that this money be, because it's not going to be used in 2022, that it be available in 2023 for the continuation of these projects. In the past, you have seen this for our enterprise business software and miscellaneous items that come up throughout the year, as well as a statutory requirement for library operations and maintenance. So for this year, we're winding down on our enterprise business solution program, but there's a potential that we still could implement a module in 2023. So we're asking to carry forward a balance for that, as well as training, which is the MEUW training that was actually cut from the 2023 budget, but we're under contract for some of those services. So there's amount in there for that. And then an estimated amount that we would think we need to carry forward for the library, which will actually get adjusted once we get through the year-end process. So the estimated total for carry forward into 2023's budget is $262,448. And with that, I would recommend that the committee recommend council approval of the resolution number 2022-49.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Hendler? We have a motion to approve and send on to council by Mr. Hendler. A second by Mr. Wagner.
Yeah.
Questions and discussion? Mr. Wagner?
Yes, thank you. On the library one, that's $191,498.
Correct.
That's a pretty specific amount. Is that a specific project that you need to do, or is that, where'd you get that specific of an amount? And in comparison, IT wants 60,000 carte blanche.
Sure. That's actually a long-term carryover. It's been building over the years. Prior to my arrival, I know that the library was saving for their new integrated library system. When I came on board, we got an $85,000 grant that paid for that. So that's some of that money. About another $90,000 occurred at the beginning of the pandemic when the prior director laid off staff for multiple months. So about $90,000 of that is actually wages that were never paid to staff members while they were laid off.
Do you have any particular need that you want to fund with that?
We are actually hoping to, as you probably know from some of my comments at other meetings, our staff is paid substantially below the pay grade levels that the rest of the city gets paid. So during 2023, I'll be working with my board to bring their wages up and actually use some of
They
that.
aren't subject to the city wage scale at all, are they?
We're not attached to it, no.
Okay, well, thank you. That answers it.
Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion to approve resolution number 2022-49 and send on to council for final action. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 10, request to recommend council approval of various insurance renewal agreements presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director. Ms. Selensky.
Okay, so here we have a listing each year. The League of Wisconsin Municipalities Mutual Insurance Company submits its cost estimates for the upcoming year for our various insurance policies, which are detailed out in the memo. The only one that we have not gotten back for sure is for our airport, but I've estimated a slight increase for that policy. So with that, staff would recommend the committee and recommend council approval of the 2023 insurance premiums as presented and authorize me to execute those renewals.
I have a motion by Mrs. Tompkins to approve and send on to council. Second by Mrs. Spiros. Questions, comments? Mr. Wagner.
This cybersecurity is new. Is that, there's a 60% increase. Do we know why?
So those are crimes, again, you know, from outside attackers, where, you know, they might hijack your computer software or redirect payments or shut it down with a virus. And so in the event that the city would experience a loss for that sort of attack on our information systems, or even, you know, our police, you know, ticketing system or whatever informational technology system we have, this insurance would cover any losses that we have. And this has become more and more common. We hear from time to time in the news that, you know, certain agencies get a virus and are shut down for a period of time until, you know,
Until they pay.
until they pay or.
Ransomware, right?
Correct. This would be related to that.
Okay. And we've never had that before, or?
It's relatively new. We had it last year, but, you know, based on experience, the cost of that premium is increased.
Wow. Okay.
Any other discussion or questions? Mrs. Tompkins.
For insurance, do we bid out? Do we ever get bids, or is this the best deal around?
The League of Wisconsin Municipalities is the insurance carrier that is dedicated and specializes in insurance policies for municipalities. So this is not something we would piecemeal out quote-wise for different, you know, all these different categories of insurance. They handle it as a package, and then they are contracting with their insurers to insure the best premiums that they can offer to each of the municipalities that they serve.
Mr. Barg.
Thank you. You may recall that Councilmember O'Reilly did ask that this be put on a future agenda, so it will be on the agenda for council next Tuesday to talk about local companies that may wish to bid on these different types of insurance. And at that time, before that, Jennifer will have a memo in the packet explaining some of these things, and you know, we can have a discussion at that time. Because I know he's concerned about that issue, but I don't disagree with anything that the finance director just said.
We're discussing at a council level during the meeting after we approve a consent agenda. I'm assuming it would not be anything that would be done for this year. It would probably be something we would potentially look at for the following year.
Yeah, this is not intended to affect this year at all. I think what Councilmember O'Reilly is wondering, looking ahead to next fall, whether or not there's an opportunity for local providers to bid and what that might look like.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, we have a motion to approve the renewals, to send on to council, and to then allow the finance director to go ahead and execute those renewals. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
Damn agreeable.
Thank you.
We're just too damn agreeable. I know.
Number 11, request to recommend council approval of revised policy number 3.800, step increases for those employees who are new or newly promoted during the first 6 months of the year, presented by the Barg, City Administrator. Mr. Barg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll try to keep this as clear as I possibly can so it doesn't get muddied, but currently a new employee or newly promoted employee that takes their new position between January 1st and January 1st and June 30th is eligible for a general wage increase that the employees might get from the council effective July 1. They get it after 6 months. So if I started on March 1st, I would be eligible for the general wage increase that the council might give on July 1. I'd be eligible on September 1. That's not the same for the step increases that come from performance reviews following a performance evaluation period. Currently, if you start on or after January 1st, you're not eligible for a step increase until July 1st of the following year. So someone starting on January 3rd, 2023, either starting a new position or being promoted to another position, they wouldn't be eligible for their first step increase until July 1 of 2024. That seems a bit excessive to me, especially given the fact that the prime period you would expect a new employee to be progressing in their skill level and their development would be during those first couple of years. So having a person who starts on February 1st wait 17 months for a step increase eligibility when everybody else is getting them in 12 months with successful performance reviews seems out of place. So we took a look at this situation, talked about it with our HR director, Sarah Dressel. We discussed it at some length. There's no perfect place to land, but my thought is that perhaps splitting the difference and saying if you start on or after April 1st of a year, you have to wait until July 1st of the following year to be eligible for that step increase, which would be up to 15 months. But if you start that position or you're newly promoted between January 1st and March 31st, you would be eligible for a step increase 6 months after that. In other words, you'd be eligible the same date that you would be eligible for your wage scale adjustment as a whole that the city gets, you'd be eligible for your step increase. That may seem like, well, you could do different permutations of that, and that could be criticized as well, or challenged. But there's nothing perfect that comes from this. Perhaps the most perfect system would be if everybody was eligible for a step increase 12 months after they were hired. But there are some problematic things with that. Having everybody on different performance reviews cycles. This person starts on March 1st, this person starts on May 1st, keeping track of everyone's performance reviews. And it's a little difficult. We do it in a cycle here where we're always evaluating the performance in the second quarter of the year. And it'd be hard to get everybody on and keep people on separate schedules. And we prefer not to do that for payroll purposes as well. So the recommendation is that we look at using April 1st as a cutoff in the future. On or after that, you get it the following July 1st. Before that, but after January 1st, you get it after 6 months. I intended to put a policy in here for you to review with the language. The additional language is probably going to be 2 sentences. So if you choose to be supportive of this, you can do one of 2 things. You can direct me to make that change and bring it to the council when it goes to consent agenda next week, or I can bring it back on December 20th with that exact verbiage for you that evening. But right now, I really want to know if you're supportive of this request, and you can decide where it goes from there.
So we're not necessarily looking to take action. We're looking for just a discussion at this point.
You could do one of 2 things. If you feel comfortable, given the limited language that I'm going to put in that policy, if you feel comfortable with me inserting that and putting it on the council agenda for Tuesday night, I can do that. If you'd prefer to give general support, I can bring it back on December 20th to this body with the actual language. I really meant to have this in the packet on Friday. I just didn't get to it.
Mr. Wagner?
Is there any urgency at all in revising this policy? I mean, are there employees who are at risk of not being able to receive a step increase because of this right now?
No, I would say the urgency is if we can get it done by the 20th, even if it's finance at 5:30 and council at 6, all in one swoop, then it would take effect January 1st for anybody who is hired or promoted after 1/1/23. That would be the only urgency. There's not urgency in getting it to the finish line
Well,
next Tuesday.
pardon me, but if we put the date of the dates that you were talking about, April, if they're hired on or before April 1st, was that it? They would be eligible for the step increase in July. Is that right?
6 months after they started, yeah.
6 months after they started, right? So, but it would be anybody, if somebody was hired on April 28th or something like that, then they still in 6 months would be eligible.
No, it'd be until July 1st of the following year.
Okay, excuse me. I meant March
Correct.
28th, I'm sorry. But they'd still be eligible for the step increase in July, or in 6 months or not, that's September, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But they'd still be that way. I mean, it doesn't make any difference if we pass this ordinance now or basically in March.
Well, it does though, because if a person's hired on January 10th, currently, they're going to be set up for the fact they're not going to get an increase, a step increase possibility until.
You mean you wouldn't make the change in the personnel policy retroactive? So to anybody that hired, if we didn't do this until February, and somebody was hired in January, it wouldn't be retroactive to them?
I suppose this body and the council could dictate that, you're right. I would prefer to get it done by 12/31, but if you were to do that, you could retroactively, state that as well.
Yeah, I just know that we're going to have 2 very busy council meetings on the 13th and the 20th. And I wonder if we want to clutter the agenda is what I'm thinking about, is what I'm concerned about.
Well, the main thing I'm concerned about tonight is whether or not you find this appropriate. If you don't, then I need to go back to the drawing board. If you do, I can bring the language on the 20th, or I can send it straight to council with the two sentences that I intend to insert.
Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you, Chair. I really don't like this policy. It doesn't mean I'm going to support it, but there's a reason why. You know, I mean, when you think about it, if somebody is hired August 1st, they need to wait 11 months till they get their raise because it's going to come the following July. If someone's hired March 31st, they're going to wait 3 months till July. If someone's hired April 2nd, they're going to wait 15 months. So there's really no fair way to do it, I don't think. I mean, you're always going to have somebody waiting longer than someone else, depending on the time that they're hired. Unless I'm misunderstanding this.
I think the one date you said might have been wrong. The person who starts on, what did you say, April?
I said somebody so your cutoff date is March 31st, correct?
Correct.
So somebody who's hired on March 30th is going to get a raise 3 months later.
Oh, 6.
6
Oh,
months.
6 months. They have to be here 6 months to be eligible.
So not July 1st. So what's the
No,
July
it'd be
1st?
July 1st is the date when everybody gets their general wage increase. But the way things are written, the way I understand it, and again, it's not clearly spelled out in policy as well as I'd like to, but that you don't even have a performance review until you've been here 6 months. So if you start on January 15th, you wouldn't have that during this performance review period, which ends on June 30th. That's where the 6 month thing comes in. To go to your point though, I think the only way to get around what you're saying in the broader sense is to use people's starting date of employment. And, you know, and I get that. I've talked about that at staff level, you know, to say if you start on March 13th, your review is on, you know, the next year right before March 13th. And if you are eligible, the 13th of March is when you get your, you know, your step increase. But that causes, given our system and the way we have our performance review cycle that we work with all the department heads, that causes some problems, plus the idea of monitoring everybody's date. We prefer to do it in one clump for everybody to go through the process with our department and division heads.
If I can follow up.
Mrs. Spiros.
So yes, I understand the rationale. I mean, I don't know if I agree with the rationale. I don't know that I'd want to do, if I were a supervisor, I don't know that I would want to do my whole department's reviews in 1 month rather than just spread them out. But that's just me. So I don't know what the perfect answer is. I mean, I guess I'll support what you recommend, but to me, the ideal situation would be that these reviews were done on their higher dates every year.
Mrs. Tompkins.
Okay, so if someone is hired in March, they get a raise in July, and 6 months later, which would be about August, they get their first increase. They get the review and their increase. Is that right?
No, if they're hired in March, you know, they won't have been here long enough to get the July 1st general wage increase. Let's say the council said everybody gets a 2% increase as of July 1. They wouldn't get that until they've been here 6 months.
Gotcha.
So if they're hired in March, then sometime in September, they would get that, whatever the 2%, 1% that the council gave across the board. Currently, they wouldn't be eligible for the step increase, going from step 1 to step 2 on their pay scale if they're doing well, until the following July 1st. So those two things would be separated.
Okay, so I've got, if they're hired in March, 6 months later, in September, they'll get this increase that everyone else got in July.
Correct.
But then they wouldn't get any kind of step increase until the following July.
Correct.
Okay. And then if they're hired in April, then they, in October, 6 months later, would get the July raise that everyone else got. Is that right?
Right, in October.
In October. And then they would get their next step increase would be the following July as well. Is that right?
Correct. And I realize what this looks like and sounds like when you say it out loud. It means someone's hired in April. By the time they get to July 1 of 2020, let's say they both started at step 1. You're hired in April. By the time you get to July 1 of 2024, you're going to have had 2 step increases, one in October and another one on July 1st, 2024. So you're going to go from step 1 to step 3. And I said that wrong. I said that in reverse. The person who started in March Person who started in March will go get a 6-month step increase or be eligible in September. And then by the time they get to July 1st, 2024, they would get a second one. So that person would be on step 3. And a person who started, less than 30 days later in April would have not been eligible until July 1 of 2024 for their first one. So they'll be at step 2. And they could look at each other and say, you started 2 weeks before me, you've gotten to step 3, I'm still at step 2. But I don't know how to avoid that. Whatever date you use as a cutoff, you're going to have that problem again, unless you go to a 12-month from the get-go performance review cycle.
Mrs. Tompkins?
Okay, so I'm just clarifying. So if they're hired in March, 6 months later, they get the July raise, do they also get a step increase that time too?
Not currently, but if this policy was passed, yes. They'd be eligible for a step increase in September.
So they would get 2 things happening at the same time. Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay, now, then they would wait until July to get no more step increases in July, or do they also get a step increase plus the wage increase?
They would be eligible for another step increase on July 1, 2024. By that time, we would have gotten them into the same cycle as all other city employees.
Okay, so every July, everyone can have a step increase plus a,
With successful performance reviews, correct.
Okay. And then, so then in the people who are hired in April, they get their step increase plus their July raise in October. Is that right?
Not currently and not under this proposal either. Currently, they
right.
would wait
You
till
have to
July
wait.
1 of 2024, and I'm not suggesting a change for those people. After April 1st, you'd have to wait until July 1st of 2024 to be eligible for the first step increase. They would get the 6-month general bump in October, but not the step.
So why is April your cutoff date? Could we not make the end of June the cutoff date? And so then everyone hired March, April, May, June could get their 6-month, they get their July plus their 6-month step increase 6 months later, but then July is going to come up and they'll catch up.
You could. My reason for not doing that, and that this is very, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder type of thinking. But if you start on June 15th, you're eligible then under that system for a step increase on December 15th and a second one on July 1st of the following year. You're eligible for 2 step increases in 12 and a half months. That just seemed excessive to me.
That's already happening though, isn't it? Because
No, if you're hired on June 15th of 2023 right now, you're not eligible for your first step increase until July 1 of 2024.
But other people who are hired in March are eligible 6 months later for their first step increase.
Not today, they would be under this policy, but today anybody who starts after January 1st of 2023 would not be eligible for a step increase until July 1 of 2024.
Okay, so does the new policy for anyone who's hired in April, when do they get their first step increase? Is that 6 months later?
No, that would be July 1st of the following year.
That doesn't make any sense then. Because you've got some people who are getting their first step increase 6 months later, and then other people who, if they get hired in April, we're talking like, that's a significantly longer wait.
I know, and I think that that's going to be the case on any date you pick. I think the only way to get around that, I'll say it one more time, is to go to a performance review system where you get a performance review when you start. If I was hired today, my performance review and my opportunity to get a step increase would be December 7 of 2024. That would be potentially the ideal. I'm just saying that for the purposes of our cycle, what we have in place now, tracking and implementing performance reviews with our department, that there's some other problems with that.
Can I ask the department heads who are here? So I would love to hear from department head from fire, public works, finance. Does it really matter to your workload if you do it all as one bunch or if it spreads out on people's anniversary dates? I mean, I don't know. So I'm asking you really as directors, how that would work for you.
He's got union to deal with.
Oh, that's different.
The
Oh, fire is different.
the clerk has a comment to make.
Okay,
I'll
so
speak
maybe-
on mine because I'm right here. For me, it would be very difficult to do mine with their anniversary dates because it's right in the middle of the election cycle.
all
So
of
for me personally, all at once, second quarter is really good. other department heads might disagree.
So all your employees just happen to fall during an
Happen to
election?
fall in election cycles.
Okay.
Chief?
Being newly hired, or promoted, I guess, this is gonna be my first kick at this, so, thinking out loud, I don't see any hiccups with it, but, again, this is gonna be new for me.
You don't see hiccups with doing it all at once?
Or
Either way?
either way,
Okay.
I guess I just don't
Okay.
right now, but I'm, again, lack of experience here.
All right, thanks.
Non-representative.
And Director of Public Works?
Yeah.
My experience is performance reviews tend to be a bit of a chore, and I prefer to do them all at once rather than have it spread out and face that chore every month. So I like to just get them all done at one chunk. When you're in that mode, you cycle through them, and then it's behind you for the rest of the year.
Thank you. Does finance want to weigh
That's
in?
my personal preference as well. I get in a frame of mind when I'm looking at performance reviews, and it's my work style. It's easier for me to crank them all out at one time.
Thank you.
My real goal in doing this was, I just thought it was absurd that someone could wait as long as really almost touching on 18 months before being eligible for, a step increase, because again, I think that's the greatest level of productivity increase during that first year to 2 years of employment. But I understand the complicated nature of this.
I have more concern with the general wage increase policy than I do with the step increase policy. And if I'm correct in my understanding here, the general wage increase is not seen by a new or promoted employee for at least 6 months. So in my little scenario I'm going to draw out for you here, we have a brand new city garage worker who's hired. I'll just throw a date out there, say July 1, and they're hired at whatever the step one pay is. And 30 days later, another city garage worker is hired, same exact job, at a higher rate now because we just had a general wage increase that went through. And so for the next 5 months, these two employees, one with actually 1 month more experience, are making different money. So the person with the 1 month more experience is making less money than the brand new employee because they did not see that general wage increase. Same thing could be said if they're hired 5 months before that. They're hired in February. So now they've worked for, 5 months, and the next person's hired with no experience, making more money while they're finishing that. That's, I think, more of a concern. And what that actually lends to is that we could have people making less than step one. Because if you're hired at step one is boosted up and you're not at step one anymore. You're below our hiring wage. That's bigger concern to me. Personally, I would rather see that general wage increase affect everybody equally, no matter when they were hired. And then I would like to say, and I know it's probably not popular, but you have to work at least 12 months before you look at a step increase. Or we go the full opposite, which is what I think Mrs. Tompkins was getting at. And we'll just say, you're hired before July 1, 6 months, and then the next round, another, and you're lucky. And if you're hired after July 1, then you're waiting 12. And I could justify that in the fact that Mr. Barr just said, your biggest growth is when you're first hired. Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on this. And the reason is that you mentioned that we should be separating the step increase from the cost of living. Well, that's true because they both serve different purposes. So I don't see any sense in withholding the cost of living to any employee, no matter when they were hired. And if they were hired on June 30th and it came into effect and the new one came into effect on July 1, fine, they get it, because that is the market value of their position as far as we have determined, okay? So that makes sense, that makes good sense. Waiting for the step increase depends on how their skills, training, and probationary period work out. And that one, I think we can withhold until they complete the 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, no matter when that 6 month falls, they should have they should have the review. And it could be I think at the county, we have a little different system. Basically, when they've been hired in a probationary status, their oversight committee conducts a review of 6 months and issues a letter. It's basically, we talk to the department head and say, okay, is this person fulfilling the needs that you wanted? Are there problems with it? If there are no problems with it, we'll say, okay, go ahead and take them off the probationary status, and now they can get their stip, whatever that stip pay is. You know, if it's if they were hired in $2 less an hour than they would be as probation, then they get the full amount. So, I mean, and usually it's nothing very, it is not terribly trying or it's not an imposition on the department heads to say, yeah, I think I want to keep this one, or no, we got a problem, I want to extend this for 6 months, which we've done that too. So I think the bifurcating is a good idea, and it sure does eliminate some of the confusion about who gets what when and how they do it. So I'd like to see I would like to see the policy rewritten to reflect the bifurcation.
Mr. Barg.
You know, I've been so focused on the whole step piece for a while that the part you talked about, Tom, I hadn't even considered. Your argument was very compelling. I mean, the idea that someone might start in a position on May 15th and someone comes along and starts the same job, administrative associate or whatever it is, on July 15th and starts at a higher rate of pay is absurd. And I guess maybe I don't see that play out in, you know, documentation that crosses my desk. So whatever you decide to do with the step increase, I think that exactly what you're talking about ought to be corrected to take effect July 1 for everybody, regardless of when they started.
Great.
If I can ask one more question, what is the time frame of the yearly reviews? Are we doing those in June so that they're effective in July? Are we doing those in March in preparation for the July? What are we looking at for the timing?
They're done in the second quarter. Usually the HR director will put a note out in the early part of April, and they happen throughout the second quarter, need to be, you know, turned in by the middle of June. And then, of course, any adjustments take place on July 1.
Okay. So it sounds as though there's at least amongst a few people, a desire to separate the general wage increase from the hiring. When the general wage increases, whoever's on that step sees the increase regardless of how long they've been here. As Mr. Wagner pointed out, that's a cost of living increase. It's not a how great you're doing increase. When we're looking at the step increase, I think that's where we're still stuck on the whole, when do we do this? I could go any way. If they're doing all of the reviews in April, well, I could see the justification for the April 1 date saying, yeah, it's somewhat arbitrary, but at the same time, it's sort of not, in that you get hired before April. After 6 months, you're eligible for a step increase. Then by the time we get around to doing your 1 year review, after you've been here for that year, then you'd be eligible for the next one. If you're hired after April, then, you know, I can see the justification for that. What's the desire of this body? We want to see something rewritten for our next Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee that we can then review and approve. I'm seeing some nodding of heads. And what are we thinking about the dates of the step increases?
So do we need to vote on it? Is this a voting thing that we need to make a motion?
I think we're looking for a consensus of what the policy is going to be rewritten to be. We're not approving a policy at this time, but if you want to make a motion of a date, and we can give that direction to the Mr. Barg to put into the policy, I guess I would leave that up to you.
If I have direction what you want, I'll bring it back the way you're requesting.
I mean, I would agree that it makes more sense just to say on July 1st, everyone gets their cost of living, whether they've been there for a week or not. I think it's just easier, but that's what I think. And I would say to department heads, is that easier? Is it easier for finance if, you know, everyone just gets it on July 1st, or I don't know.
Well, for the cost of living, that's no problem. I mean, that's something payroll does routinely, is applies the general wage increase that council's granted to everyone on July 1st. Currently not to those individuals we're talking about who haven't been here long enough, but that's not the problem. The problem is with, you know, tracking the step increases if they get off on different days.
So it sounds like we're gonna try to get the general wage increase automatic for everybody regardless of start date into the new policy. What about the step increase?
I mean, it sounds like it's the best way we can do it at the moment. And,
Which
you
is
know,
what?
Which is just to keep it like it is with March, what is it? March 31st is the cutoff. It doesn't sound perfect. Yeah, the way that your new proposal.
Proposed.
Yep.
Proposed.
So we'll
Okay.
keep the proposal of April 1st as the cutoff. If you're hired prior to April 1st, you'd be eligible for potentially two-step increases by the following July. So within the first 19 or more months of your work. If you're hired July 1 or sorry, April 1 or after, then you're waiting for the 17-month. Not 17, no, the 14-month rotation, 15-month rotation until you're eligible. Okay, do you have some good direction?
Yeah, is that
So then
general? I see
we'll
heads
see that in
nodding.
writing, and then at that point, we will take
Okay.
formal,
Thank you.
yeah, we'll take formal action once that policy has been presented to us with those recommendations. Yes, Mrs. Spiros.
Mr. Barg, I'm going to ask you when you bring that policy back to bring some examples of hire dates, just so we can make it
Yeah,
clear in
I
our
know.
head.
I apologize, it's very confusing and that would be helpful.
Not your fault. I
Fine.
think if we could see dates where you could say, for example, somebody who's hired this date, this date, this date, this is how it's going to work.
Agreed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just I guess a quick question. I don't know if we're allowed to take action on this. I would think we'd be able to, although I don't know if it's defined in the item number 11. But do we have employees who are below step 1 at this time, and do we need to rectify that on a more timely fashion?
I don't think so.
Below step 1?
Yes, because if they haven't met their 6 months yet and they haven't gotten the increase that was provided in July, I happen to know of one employee that has just received that increase in the last month. I'm wondering if there are others that have not yet met the bottom.
Well, once we get to January 1st, I mean, everybody will be where they
Where they're supposed to be.
should have been had we done this earlier.
So since we're that close, we might as well just wait until the policy comes through.
I think so.
All right. All righty, then we'll leave that up for the next meeting. Number 12, request to recommend council approval to refill. I don't want to talk about this one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Request to recommend council approval to refill the vacant or to be vacant position of Public Works Director, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator. Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Dan Knecht has submitted his resignation. It's effective on March 16th of 2023. His last working day is that day. Dan has done a truly outstanding job in this position. I don't think I need to tell you that. He's been here for, a quarter of a century and been a rock for this council and for the city for that period of time. It's also been a privilege for me to work with him since I came here in January of 2011. He's just a great guy to work with. But he is moving on. And as outlined in the job description, the Public Works Director certainly has a lot of important duties, provides a wide variety of functions for the city. And some of these include the oversight of airport engineering, facilities management, street and wastewater utility. It's also a critical position for many other reasons, a very key point of collaborating and coordinating the various departments on a lot of different types of projects. The position is also an important part of the city's leadership team. So what I'm requesting is the committee recommend council approval to begin the process of recruiting. Having said that, I don't think anything would happen until the first of the year. People generally aren't out looking for work, as I understand it, during December. So we would wait until that first week of January to kick off the process of trying to find a replacement.
Mr. Wagner.
I would move that we accept Dan's resignation with the deepest regrets and begin the process of finding his replacement.
I have a motion on the table. Second by Mrs. Tompkins. Questions or discussion? Mr. Knecht, can you step up to the mic, please?
Thank you. I realize that my retirement announcement has caught everyone by surprise, and I'd like to offer just a little explanation. As Steve mentioned, I've been in this position 25 years and had the privilege of being involved in many great things in this community, and I'm proud of a lot of that, all of it. But 25 years is a long time to be in any position, but especially one that's as demanding and challenging and stressful at times, a lot of times, as this position is. Ironically, that's what I've enjoyed so much about this, is the wide variety of engagement, problem-solving opportunities that I've been able to get involved with. And we've solved a lot of problems over the years. But after a while, that takes a toll on you and wears you down until one day you realize you just don't have the energy for it anymore and you need to make a change. And that's what I'm doing. In retirement or semi-retirement of some sort will be that change for me. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunities I've had here and the positive impact I've been able to make in this community. And simply just look forward to working with you during the next 3 months for a successful transition. So thank you.
You will be incredibly missed.
Any other comments or discussion? Thank you, Dan. It's sad for us to see somebody of your caliber stepping down. All right, I have a motion to recommend council approval to accept the resignation or the retirement and to refill the vacant position with accept the retirement with deepest regrets, and then to refill the vacant position. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? Don't think I can. That motion passes unanimously. Any other items, suggested items for future agendas? Seeing none and seeing all of the business before this committee is complete, I will now declare this meeting adjourned.